This is a Squiz podcast. We're your shortcut to being informed.
The weekly wrap is the week in news and what's coming up. I'm Claire Kimball.
And I'm Jodie Spears.
Happy Election Day. Many are saying that it's been a major snooze fest, but we'll get you across some themes that are notable. You'll need something to talk about at your election parties tonight.
Yeah, if that's a thing for you, then we've definitely got your back. Also, the Nagi v Brooki recipe fight and a big blackout in Europe, along with the Erin Patterson murder trial.
Yeah, you've got a podcast recommendation for that. And we'll get you ready for the week ahead in the post-election world. Let's get into it.
Let's do it.
This show is brought to you by HubSpot. Their AI-powered platform is helping you accomplish more than ever before. And their Breeze AI agents handle all the busy work so you can focus on growing your business. Jodie, the biggest story of the week and the weekend, and maybe next week, is today's federal election. There's only really one question to answer. What's the price of a dozen eggs?
I could tell you, didn't that just take off this week after the PM and the coalition leader had some trouble answering that in last Sunday's election debate on 7? The answer is about $8.50. I think the ones I buy are actually slightly more than that, but Dutton's guess of about $4.20 and Albo's $7 were short of the mark. It's not the first time the what's the price of device has been used in an election campaign. That one's a classic.
It's a perennial favourite of the media's coverage of an election campaign. It's almost like a vaudeville act in the campaign, I reckon. You roll out the leader, you watch them fail spectacularly because they never get it right. They need to accurately name the price of things. And I guess when it comes to us regular Aussies, we're buying those things day in, day out. It's a bit of a metric about whether these people are in touch or not.
Yeah, they do live a different life. You were telling me from your experience of working for one of the leaders during an election campaign that they do absolutely prepare for this.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. So one of the jobs that had to get done each week was someone was responsible for this one-page cheat sheet. It had things like the price of a litre of milk, a loaf of bread, a litre of fuel, the unemployment rate, the official interest rate, that sort of stuff. And the trick really was making sure that your boss had a look at it and actually clocked those numbers because you just never knew.
Yeah, I remember last election campaign, Albanese couldn't name the unemployment rate or the interest rate on day one of the campaign, and there were tons of headlines about whether he was up for the job on the basis of that.
Wasn't that an awkward moment? I remember where it was too. I think he was in a park like in Launceston or something, and it was like, oh, gee.
Here we go.
That's quite a start.
And it was similar during this debate. It was almost that slow motion car crash where you're like, what's he going to say?
But look, Albanese overcame it. It wasn't so catastrophic after all. But as far as this chapter in the election, I reckon it might be one of the very few things that people do actually remember from the campaign. I guess if they really remember anything at all.
Yeah, if you Google the words boring and 2025 election campaign, there is an alarming number of news articles that come up from that. I should say, though, that lots of them are written by journalists who have a vested interest in wanting more drama on the campaign.
They really do want drama. And of course they do, because these are people who have just put their lives on hold for a month to jump on a plane, not knowing where they're going on any given day, and then bundled off and taken to a petrol station or taken to a park in Launceston. And I should say, Jodie, that's how we met, was the 2010 election campaign. You were covering that campaign for 7. And I guess I wanted to ask what that experience was like for you.
Yeah, really intense. Like you just said, it's like the world's longest mystery trip. 5 weeks, I think it was, during that campaign. We were on the road. There's no day off. You are go, go, go every day. Oftentimes a couple of states in one day, and you don't, like you said, you don't know where you're going. So it was only maybe when we were in the air that they'd say, oh, we're going to Alice Springs, the red dirt probably was a giveaway in that case. But, you know, you might be going to Tassie, you might be going to Cairns. And the way that we did it was we spent a week on each side and we alternated. So I was with Gillard for a week, I was with Abbott for a week, and that sort of
mixed it up a bit.
Yeah, it means that you don't kind of fall in too heavily with one side, I suppose.
Yeah, I guess working for a politician, you do know where you're going today and tomorrow and the day after. But for the journalists, they have no idea. You just get up, get on a bus, get on a plane.
And you guys are very tight-lipped.
Very tight-lipped.
We do try.
Very discreet. Look, I thought Phil Corey from the Financial Review, with this question about how dull this election campaign has been, I thought he put it really well. He says that from an execution perspective, Albanese's campaign has been almost flawless. He said that's in stark contrast to his campaign in 2022. We just talked about day one for Albanese last time around, getting those numbers wrong, which was a bit of a train wreck. And what Corey says is you sort of got to put Dutton's campaign in that perspective as well.
Yeah, Phil Corey always puts it well, I think, and is also a lovely person to junior journos from my experience. I think it's easy to assume that these people are experts at campaigning, but an election campaign as a leader is a whole other world. And if you haven't done it before, then your lack of experience can be exposed on a pretty grand scale.
Yeah, I mean, these are people who are in front of the media all the time, but a campaign sort of has a whole life of its own, and the mechanics of how it actually works are very, very specific to that 5 or 6 or 7 week period.
Whatever the result is, there will be a lot more of that analysis to come. No doubt we'll be talking about it next week as well. It's also notable that this campaign has been interrupted by a whole bunch of other events.
Yeah, it feels like this final week of the campaign really has been the only one with a lot of clean air around it. The first 2 weeks, it was dominated by Donald Trump's Liberation Day tariffs. That was the biggest news story, not just here in Australia, but across the world. That stole a lot of attention and dominated the campaigns. There was 10 days where Aussies, quite rightly, tuned out. We had Easter and then we had the Anzac Day long weekend. So getting attention for an election campaign during that period was pretty tough. And then the Pope died, which dominated the news cycle for another week.
Yeah, pretty unlucky for them, really. Even this week, watching the TV news here in Sydney, the first 2 stories all week pretty much have been the inquest into the Bondi Junction stabbing attack and Erin Patterson's murder trial. So the election has struggled to get a look in at all, really.
Yeah, it really has. And maybe if our leaders were doing big, exciting, drama-filled things, it might have been a bit further up those news bulletins. But look, we've just talked about why this campaign hasn't been one for the ages. There have been some things to note, though. Earlier this week, I set us the challenge, Jodie, to zero in on one thing that we think makes it notable. I just wanted to clock that if I had the mind to do some postgraduate study, which I don't.
Be careful, Claire.
I know. You've definitely given me some good advice on that. If I wanted to write a thesis, it probably would be on this sort of really big change around social media and how Australians are consuming news. I'm wondering if at least some of this disconnect, why this campaign has been seen as boring, is this sort of, whether our politicians are actually being successful in delivering their campaign messages in the channels where people are actually consuming information these days.
You're talking about the fact that people are largely tuning out to mainstream media.
Yeah, exactly right. So when you look at some of the big reports that have been done, we're at a bit of a tipping point this year, which is that for the first time, more than half of us won't be getting our news from mainstream media, which is a big change when you think about then how election campaigns are run. The campaigns are basically, as we've just talked about, putting a bunch of journalists on a plane, getting them to a town or a city and doing an event and then doing a press conference and then getting on with your day. But if more than half of us aren't consuming that information in that way, the jury's really out whether the campaign messages are cutting through.
Yeah, it's a real tipping point, isn't it? And I remember noticing this a long time before I left my job in the mainstream media. None of my friends were watching the TV news at all.
Yeah, and it's something that we've been talking about for quite a while now, but it feels, I think, like it's a really stark in focus thing, this election campaign. And I have no doubt that the major parties will report that they've actually spent more money promoting their messages in social media than ever before. But they're mostly attack ads. And that's not really high quality information either.
Not to mention those trumpet texts, which we've been bombarded with. I reckon this will definitely be a subject that we return to, because how we're empowered to make good decisions is actually why you started the Squiz.
Oh, yeah, exactly right. Jodie, for you, early voting has just been such a thing in this election.
Yeah, this is another trend that we've noticed at recent elections, which I think continues to build. And in many ways, like I said, I think it's linked to what we've just been talking about. Part of the reason that mainstream media has declined is because people don't want to or need to wait for a certain time to watch a bulletin anymore. They also don't want or need to wait until a specific Saturday between certain hours to vote. They want to do it when it suits them.
It's this real change in us, isn't it? We want to do the thing that we want to do in the way that we want to do it when we want to do it.
Yeah, same with
voting.
flexible working as well. And it might also be another COVID-related change like those things are. People voted early during the pandemic to avoid the crowds, and maybe they found that they quite liked it. And, you know, this is sort of easier than doing it the other way, so it's become a lasting change.
Yeah.
As of Wednesday, more than 4 million people had voted. No doubt that will have climbed significantly in those final days before the election. That's up at least 26% on 2022. And interestingly, 2.6 million people had applied for a postal vote, which is also a record. And it's not just the young people either who are voting early. My mum said, I did it a week ago and now I can switch off. I don't need to keep listening. I'm sick of the sight of all of them. So it's working for a lot of us.
There's some discussion, and there was even after the Queensland state election last year, because 2/3 of Queenslanders voted early. So, 2 million people getting in before official election day in a state like Queensland is quite a dramatic shift when it comes to the campaigns and how they're getting information. Like, are you calling your campaign drop dead date almost 2 weeks before the actual polling day? Yeah, it really limits the major parties in how they're going to get information out if that's the way we're going to vote in the future.
And it's quite inconvenient, I think, logistically for them as well. It means that they need to find volunteers who are willing to cover so many extra hours at these pre-polling sites. So there are wider implications, like you said, for the traditional election campaign, which is designed around communicating with voters in the lead up to that particular day. So parties really need to rethink how the campaign is done, and it's probably why we're seeing these big announcements come earlier, and perhaps why we all unfortunately get the sense that we're living in this sort of semi-permanent election campaign. It's not as such a clear start as it used to be.
It's a really good point. And it's a worldwide trend as well. It's not just here in Australia.
Have you voted?
I haven't. I wait until election
You're
day.
a traditionalist.
I'm a traditionalist.
Look, the only reason I haven't is because I'm manning the sausage sizzle at my local school, and I'm a bit concerned about the effect on the democracy sausage if people are voting early.
I know. I even have friends who have voted early, but they're still going to go and find a democracy sausage.
See, that helps
at
us
their
raise
local
funds
public
for my
school.
daughter's band.
Yeah.
But I thought this was a real sign of the times this week. Uber Eats advertising delivery of democracy sausages. And I was trying to picture what the poor sausage and bread would look like by the time it was popped on the back of the bike and showed up at your door.
That was exactly where my mind went to as well.
No
So how
good.
does that travel? I don't know that that's necessarily a really good outcome at the other end.
Someone take a photo for us if you get one, but please.
Yeah, exactly. Look, just to round us up, the numbers, Andrew and I talked about this on the Shortcuts episode, so go back to Thursday in the Squiz Today show if you want to get into some of the numbers around these things. But the two numbers to burn on your brain is that for the coalition to win, it needs a net gain of 18 seats.
It's a lot.
Huge ask. So just to give you some context, Tony Abbott in 2013, when he won government from Kevin Rudd, he won 19 seats, and that was a landslide. It was a big shift, and I think people thought going in it was kind of a fait accompli. People thought that there was going to be a big shift towards the coalition.
I think a different mood this time, yeah.
For sure. And look, it's not just about the major parties either. The Teals and the Greens and the Independents, they're a big talking point as well. One of the big takeouts from tonight will be to see what support has actually drifted their way.
Yeah, let's park that for next week. There'll be lots to talk about.
In the age of AI, you need business software that's easy to use and actually delivers results fast. That's what makes HubSpot's approach to AI so refreshing. Do more with less stress, thanks to Breeze, their suite of AI tools. Breeze agents handle busy work for you, creating marketing content and finding sales leads and handling customer service questions. And Breeze Copilot gives you the right info at the right time so you can always stay 2 steps ahead. Customers are selling faster and saving hours on work every week. Visit hubspot.com/AI to get started today. 3 other stories from the week. Let's start with the mushroom murder trial. We couldn't not talk about that this week.
Yeah, every now and then a different sort of crime case pops up which grabs everyone's attention, and this is definitely one of those. It's being talked about around the world. It's not attracted only local media. There are also foreign journalists, novelists, film and documentary makers. They have all descended on the Victorian town of Morwell this week for the trial of Erin Patterson.
I wonder what they're making of Morwell. I wonder what Morwell's making of them.
I think the Morwell coffee shop is probably booming in business.
Absolutely. So Erin Patterson, of course, she's 50 years old. She's accused of inviting members of her extended family to lunch and deliberately using death cap mushrooms to fatally poison 3 of them. Her former in-laws, Don and Gail Patterson, along with Gail's younger sister, Heather, died. Heather's husband, Ian, was the only guest to survive Erin's cooking. He spent months in hospital recovering from that. So Erin is charged with his attempted murder. Jody, you're our resident legal eagle. You said to me that it's quite unusual for a trial like this, a Supreme Court murder trial, to be held outside a capital city.
Yeah, I would have expected this to be held in Melbourne, but it is taking place in the Gippsland region, closer to the scene of the alleged crime, which is about 60 kilometres away, I believe, in the town of Leongatha.
It's a really interesting thing, and I would have thought that makes it harder to find jurors because, you know what, regional communities are like. Everyone knows everyone or has some sort of very close connection.
That's right. That's been a bit of a talking point for this trial, but they did manage to impanel a jury this week, 10 men and 5 women, and they gave them a list of all the witnesses and the lawyers, everyone basically involved in the trial, to make sure they didn't recognise any names. And then they gave the usual direction. The judge told the jurors that they had to disregard anything that they happened to come across in the media or on social media and to just judge this case purely on the evidence.
Yeah, good luck to them to do that.
It's tricky these days.
Really,
I mean,
really tricky.
Even when you're not trying to, you go onto social media and things pop up.
Absolutely, yeah. But they've given that undertaking plenty of new evidence this week as well. So the Crown prosecutor told the court in her opening statement that Erin Patterson invited her family members to lunch to break the news that she had ovarian cancer. Turns out she didn't have ovarian cancer.
No, the prosecution and the defence both admit that that is fake. The jury was also told that Erin Patterson served her own meal on a different coloured plate to those of her guests. They had a larger grey plate and she apparently had a smaller orange plate. They all got horrendously sick, but she didn't, and neither did her children, who she said were given some of the leftovers with the mushrooms scraped off.
Yeah, we also heard for the first time the suggestion that Patterson may have got hold of those death cap mushrooms herself.
Yeah, the prosecutor told the court that there was a post on the iNaturalist website from somebody saying that they had found some death cap mushrooms in the wild in the Gippsland region. And the prosecutor says that Erin then visited those locations. That claim was based on mobile phone data. The defence admits that the mushrooms were foraged, but their case is that this was all a terrible, tragic accident and it wasn't murder.
Yeah, of course, before this we thought that she had got them, or she had said that she had got the mushrooms from Woolies and from an Asian grocer somewhere.
Yeah.
So that was new news.
The story
she'd
changed
actually foraged
a couple of times.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. We also heard from Simon Patterson, so Erin's estranged husband, for the first time since she's been charged with murder. So he was also invited to the lunch, but he pulled out the night before. Something compelling about the coverage of this stuff when you see the text messages all laid out. I reckon I've seen it on TV, I've clicked on it in news articles, and then I've seen it on social media as well. There's something compelling about that format of reading other people's text messages.
Yeah, it feels like you're really breaching their privacy, doesn't it?
It's so intimate.
You know, the thing with this, so many people are watching on, and I think there's even a fair public crowd at the courthouse. I've covered some trials where people will actually queue to try and get their own look at what's going on.
Yeah, wow.
Sounds a bit ghoulish, but it's actually really important for the system because justice can't just be done, it has to be seen to be done. That's the whole foundation of the system. So,
as far as it all goes, the trial's expected to go for up to 6 weeks, no doubt. You'll be following all the twists and turns, I reckon.
Definitely will. And I'm going to get in early, Claire, with my recommendation this week. Mushroom Case Daily is the ABC's podcast on this case, and I think it's been well done so far. I like to hear an actual court reporter's take on these things, and the reporter involved was also fortunate enough to have won a ballot this week to get one of only 6 available seats for the media in the courtroom itself. Such is the interest and the space limitations in the room. The rest of them have to sit out in an overflow room.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask you about that, how it all works. Just 6 spots.
That's very unusual. I've never encountered that before. And I mean, you can still see everything perfectly fine from the other room, but I think there's something about being in there and sensing the atmosphere and seeing the little things that might not be picked up by the camera.
Yeah.
It's certainly an advantage for the reporters.
Body language of legal teams as well as the people involved with it. All those little things that, if you're not in the room, you don't really
Even
know.
what they're doing with their hands under the desk or the looks they give to people in the gallery.
How incredible for that ABC reporter to actually get one of those spots.
Very lucky.
Because they'd promoted this podcast right from the start of the year.
I think it changes though. My impression was that he doesn't have it for the whole 6 weeks. So
interesting.
Have to switch around.
Yeah, it'll be so interesting to see how it all goes down. We talked a bit earlier, Jodie, about where we get our news from. And Tuesday night, I'd finished work, was on the sofa, was watching 7:30 and scrolling Instagram reels at the same time, which is a bad habit.
Multitasking.
Exactly. And one popped up from Nagi Maharshi. She's from Recipe 10 Eats. I follow her very closely. Something will always pop up from her whenever I open up Instagram. And she was saying that her recipes have been plagiarised by someone called Brooke Bellamy.
This was a bombshell. What side of the ledger you fall on here, I think probably depends on your Insta preference, or you might not fall on either side of it if you're not on social media.
Yeah. So Andrew was a really good test for me on this. When I saw the post, I copied it, sent it off to the team that looks after our day-to-day news for Squiz Today and said, just keep an eye on this because I reckon this might blow up a bit and it'll probably be in the news tomorrow morning. Andrew picked it up, had a look at it and went, what on earth are you talking about and who are these people?
What do you mean, Andrew?
He's just
Nagi's a national treasure.
Exactly. He's just not in that social media world. So if that's for you as well, that you didn't understand really who these people are. Plenty don't, but they are quite a big deal.
Big time online, yeah. Nagi has 1.6 million followers on Insta. Brooki Bakehouse has 1 million. And a good comparison there is our political leaders, I think. Anthony Albanese has 460,000 followers. Peter Dutton has only 55,000. The women have actually had success outside that virtual world. Both of them are best-selling recipe book authors, and that's where things have come into focus here.
Yeah, about what's been published in Brooke's recipe book, which has just come out quite recently and has done quite well. So what happened is that Nagi said 2 recipes in that book, one for caramel slice and one for baklava, are basically a word-for-word rip-off of recipes that Nagi had published online for free years earlier.
Yeah, it's led to an interesting conversation this week. How many recipes are actually original, particularly if you're talking about a classic like caramel slice? There's only so many ways that you can make it.
Yeah, and what the experts say is that pretty much every recipe has elements taken from somewhere else. If it's going to be a caramel slice, there's not many ways you can do it. So there's lots of questions about that. But when it comes to a legal case, that's sort of at the basis of whether it could be successful or not if Nagi does actually take it to court and take Brooke on for, or her publisher on for plagiarism. You know, it's a tough one to win when it comes to intellectual property.
Yeah, and then there's the court of public opinion, which is a whole different matter.
Yeah, so Dee Madigan is someone who pops up quite a bit when talking about these sorts of things. She's a PR expert. She said something that really stuck with me this week. It might not be a legal win for anyone or a legal loss necessarily if things don't get up. What people who follow these women very closely are thinking about is their connection to those women. People love food and they feel this really emotional attachment to it.
Yeah, and people love these women. As for what happens next, Nagi says that her focus is Brooke's publisher Penguin and she's getting legal advice. She reiterated that in a post I saw where she said, please don't troll Brooke. That's not what this is about. It's actually a business dispute.
Yeah.
And we'll have to wait and see if this results in anything.
Yeah, exactly. And probably given what Dee had to say, whether it actually impacts their businesses as well. That's probably the real test when it comes to this.
One more story that we thought was worth covering this week was the enormous power outage which caused chaos in Spain and Portugal on Monday. Traffic lights were out, people were stuck in lifts, public transport had to stop, schools had to close. It was wide-scale chaos.
Yeah, and look, if you clocked this week and saw power outages in Europe and thought, didn't really hear much else on that, the impact has been huge. So the economic cost up to about $4.5 billion, talking about millions of people without any access to power for at least half a day, in some cases a lot longer than that. Manufacturing plants had to stop production. Restaurants and shops had to throw out tons and tons of food. Wastage and inconvenience on a really massive scale.
Finding a clear cause for this blackout hasn't been easy, I've found. Questions were raised as to whether foul play was involved. Spain's High Court even said that it would investigate the possibility of a terrorist strike on electricity infrastructure. There didn't seem to be any particular evidence of that, though.
Yeah, they're saying now that they want any of these investigations to go very, very quickly because questions have to be answered on this. The government says that it's keeping an open mind. It's not going to jump to conclusions. What we do know is that what happened in the space of 5 seconds and may have been linked to what they're calling imbalances in the system.
Yeah, it's all quite technical. One expert told journalists that Spain's nuclear plants weren't running at the time that it happened, so power was coming from renewable sources. There's been a big move towards renewables in Spain. And these sources were feeding saturated substations. They said that when one of those substations failed and there wasn't adequate backup, then the safety protocols kicked in and that's when the system disconnected.
Yeah, right. It certainly puts that spotlight on renewables and how these systems interact with each other. Some argue that the volatility of supply from solar and wind made Spain's power systems a lot more prone to these sorts of blackouts. Others have blamed the government for just being too complacent about infrastructure. I haven't heard that said about the Australian power system at all. It's all they're talking about.
Not at all familiar. Always blame the government. It was an interesting event, I thought, in light of some of the energy debates that we're having as well, and the election focus on renewables versus nuclear and the necessary infrastructure for each of those, which is always costly. Also a reminder, I guess, of how much we rely on power and internet connection and how vulnerable we are if something goes wrong.
Yep, we definitely need it. What's coming up? We've talked about the federal election. That's on today. The other big thing this weekend is the NRL Magic Round in Brisbane.
Yeah, it's where every NRL game is played at Lang Park. It all kicked off on Thursday night with the Women's State of Origin opener. New South Wales took that game.
They sure did. Then Monday, it's a public holiday in Queensland and the Northern Territory. Queensland might need it, particularly if you're in Brisbane and been involved in the NRL Magic Round. Having Monday off could be quite good. So a third long weekend in a row for some, not jealous at all. Early Tuesday morning our time, the Met Gala kicks off.
Fashion's night of nights. I can't wait for the memes. This year it's been co-chaired by Coleman Domingo, Lewis Hamilton, ASAP Rocky, Pharrell Williams and, of course, Anna Wintour. The theme is super fine, tailoring black style.
And look, there's a bit of a spectrum when it comes to people attending and the designers and how they interpret the theme. Always so interesting.
Very wide open spectrum.
But if you're wondering how Vogue sees it, expect a lot of suiting and nods to menswear.
Love a suit. I tried to come up with a segue from Rihanna's bejewelled Pope look at the Met a few years back into our next story, but I couldn't quite get there. But on Wednesday, the conclave begins.
Yeah, so 135 cardinals will start the process of electing a new pope. The last conclave back in 2013 lasted 2 days, but it can go for quite some time. Who knows how long it's going to take. That's because to elect the pope, you require a 2/3 majority.
It's a fascinating and quite a secretive process. We've got a shortcut on how the whole thing works and why choosing the Pope is a really big deal for the church. So a link to that is in your show notes if you want to go give it a listen.
Yeah, it's a good one. Again, if you need dinner party talking points, it's a good one. One interesting part, I've watched Conclave. Have you seen that movie?
I haven't yet. Yeah. No, it's on the list.
Yeah, it's a good one. It was Oscar nominated, of course. The interest in that has gone through the roof. So 600% up when it comes to the streaming platforms because you can go online and rent it now. A big spike. And it is, they say, according to some interviews I've seen with some of the cardinals, say it's actually pretty close to how things work. So
they've had some inside sources.
Exactly. If you want to understand that a little bit better. Linked to what's happening in Rome is Ukraine because of that sideline meeting between Trump and Zelensky at the Pope's funeral.
Yeah, they were really pushing Vladimir Putin to move things on. And on Thursday, a proposed 3-day ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine is due to begin. The timing also lines up with a number of international leaders visiting Russia, including China's President Xi Jinping.
Yeah, and the other thing that happened following that meeting in Rome between Trump and Zelensky is the US and Ukraine have signed an agreement to fund the reconstruction of Ukraine.
Yeah, so part of that deal will see the US get access to Ukraine's critical minerals deposits. It's something that Trump really wanted, and now he has it.
Moving on to our recommendations. Jodie, you've been very efficient and you've already given us
got in early.
Yours, the Mushroom Daily podcast.
Mushroom Case Daily.
Mushroom Case Daily. It's a good title, I reckon, that one, if I could remember it. We'll have the link to that in the episode notes if you want to dive into that. I've got a bit of an unusual one. So looking again at Andrew and his interests, he has pulled together in previous Squiz Todays a recommendation for a game called Snake the Globe.
Snake the Globe?
So if you like Snake, like the
classic
game that the classic, there's now a new one and it's a snake eating apples on a globe.
And you reckon it teaches you about geography?
Yeah, exactly. So look, I have a fair, I guess, working knowledge of where countries are and you know, how to get from A to B, but little did I know, I didn't know that much because efficiently you have to get the snake around the globe to pick up the apple in Sydney and then it has to go to Bogota and then it has to go to South Korea and you have to do it in the most efficient way. So I've learned a lot about the world's geography. It's really fun.
Quite handy. How do we get it? Is it just an online
It's free.
website?
There's a link. The link's in your episode notes.
Could be the next Wordle, Claire.
Could be, maybe. Squiz Press, we've got a job going at the moment.
It's exciting.
So, yeah, we're looking for someone to join our content team to work on the Squiz Today podcast and newsletter. It's a really great opportunity. We've been able to hire really terrific people in the past by doing shout-outs like this. So if you can see yourself on a podcast writing for us, definitely get in touch at hello@thesquiz.com.au. Podcast experience, not absolutely necessary, but of course we have to think that you're going to be able to be a really great connection for our audience to what we do. We're looking for people who have worked in journalism, who have worked in communications fields, who are able to look at the news and make sense of it, to come and join our team. It's a really
Based
great
in
opportunity.
Sydney or not necessarily?
Based in Sydney, yeah.
Such a good opportunity and a very friendly team.
Oh, thank you. We think we're friendly. So, yes, get in touch if that's you. I think that's it for us this week, a mega one.
Yeah, it's been so much to squeeze in.
There's always so
Maybe
much
things
news.
will slow down next week.
Well, knock on wood, please. Thanks for listening. Have a great weekend. We'll be back next week.
See you then.
A huge thanks to HubSpot for supporting today's episode. With their AI-powered customer platform, your marketing, sales and service teams can move faster, accomplish more and stress less.